We're going to head to Australia. It's really exciting to have Fiona Hillary from Melbourne. I met Fiona at a public art discussion in Auckland a few years back, and she's been a big advocate of art practices, and as she teaches public art at I'm going to say Melbourne University, RMIT, sorry, Fiona, at RMIT, and she has been a big part of the public space, journal of public space, and has really bringing in that discussion of kind of more speculative practices into public space. So she's got a lot to say, and I'm really looking forward to hearing from her too. Thank you, Fiona.
Thanks, Sophie. I'll just share my screen. Thanks for inviting me today. This is a really exciting forum to be engaged with, and I guess I'm coming here from an artist perspective. I have held positions in local government in Australia for a long time. More recently, though, working as a research partner with local government organisations here in Victoria, sort of brings some of the sort of artistic elements of thinking to creatives from other parts of multiple professions. I'm rambling, I'll get on with my talk. I've prepared a written piece that I'll read to you just to try and keep to time. And here we go. So can you see my screen? Great. So I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which I was born, the people of the Kaurna Plains. Today I live and thrive on the land of the Boonwurrung and Woiwurrung peoples of the Kulin Nation. I want to acknowledge the phenomenal influence these people and cultures have had in the formation of my own identity as a non-Indigenous Australian children. I acknowledge the traditional owners of the country throughout Australia and recognise their continuing connection to land, waters and culture. I'd like to acknowledge that there never has been a treaty. The traditional owners of this land have never ceded their sovereignty. I live in hope of a treaty. I pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and extend this to other First Nations people engaged in today's event. My presentation today reflects on my current research, so please be mindful. It's very embedded. I've been in PhD land. My current research on modes of being an artist in the Anthropocene, where our landscapes have been raised through climate change, where human and non-human entanglements speak of our shared ecologies. In today's session, I'd like to invite you to join me in holding a space, a radical space. I'm drawing on Deborah Shaw's notion of radical space here. In her recent work reflects the urgency of addressing the politics of space from new perspectives. She describes this time as an era of rapid urbanisation, global forced migrations, and the increasing growth of populations disconnected from work and housing, and now the impact of pandemic. Shaw conceives radical to encompass new political uses of space, new radical interpretations of space, and new radical imaginaries. Through this conversation, I want to experiment with this notion of radical space and invite you, the audience, to participate. I'd like to ask you to make a declaration. As we envisage returning to our public spaces, what would that be? As an artist, a planner, an architect, a creative, a community member, a family member, whatever brings you here today, I invite you to think about how you are holding space and what your community needs to fully realise your rights to public space. I'd like you to post your ideas around this in the chat. Perhaps we could start a manifesto for a post-pandemic world that we can elaborate on, present to each other, debate. We can offer to government bodies, funding organisations, or our own organisations and philanthropists. How do we creatively re-enter the world? I'm just going to kick it off by posting. I'm trying to find the chat now. I'm not sure that I can. Here we go. I'm just going to post Louisa Bravo is someone that Sophie and I have, oops, I'm sending it privately. Sorry, Elwyn, to everyone. Louisa Bravo from City Space Architecture in Bologna hosted a forum that Sophie and I spoke in a couple of weeks ago. And through the World Urban Forum, she's had some impact with the UN Sustainable Development Goals, specifically having amended Goal 11 and having a target of universal access to safe, inclusive and accessible green and public spaces, in particular for women and children, older persons and people with disabilities, added into Goal 11. So that's her declaration that she's presented at the World Urban Forum, and it's to try and kick off a kind of, let's see what declarations we come to by the end of the conversation. So when I ask how we creatively re-enter the world, it's not to say that we've left the world creative. What I should point out here actually is it's been quite unusual, quite a strange experience to hear you talking about COVID-19 and the pandemic in the past, because I don't know if you've seen the news today, but 50 metres from me, a suburb has just been locked down because we've had an increase in the community spread of COVID. So we are very far from being in the part, it's very much our present, which is quite a different to what I'm hearing you speak of today. Anyway, so we haven't creatively left the world, but with a specific focus on public art in public space, I'd like to develop a repository of ideas from a moment in time, this session, that we can all use in our spaces across the coming months, or reference, I guess, as we move through the coming months. So through the notion of speculative cities, this presentation considers how affirmative ethics and creative autonomy over the opportunity to create radical spaces for thinking and making. I'm advocating for creatively driven initiatives that allow the artist's prose to generatively reveal alternative stories of sight. When speaking of affirmative ethics, I draw on my mentor, post-human philosopher Sir Rosie Braidotti, quoting her keynote lecture from 2017 at the Netherlands Philosophical Olympics, where she tells the audience, cultivate an ethics where opening up is what we are able to do as a community, experimenting together with what we are capable of becoming. The affirmative ethics I draw on describe the relations and modes of affirmation that are possible in the negativity of our times. As we emerge from various iterations of lockdown, we're all now well aware of what limited access to public space means. Across time, in the all too familiar wake of natural disaster, in the wake of territorial warfare, through racism and discrimination, we've seen different people excluded from public space for a myriad of reasons. I've just finished reading Australian author Tony Birch's recent publication, White Girl. Through his beautifully written characters, he shared a story of the impact of the Aboriginal Protection Act, demarcating where Indigenous people can and can't go, and sadly the legacy of such policies still play out in 2020. The culmination of this time and a global pandemic, the notion of public space has re-articulated itself in multiple ways. To those of us with access to technology, public space has elaborated through online engagement more than we have ever seen. Open source platforms generate a myriad of ways of creating, making and engaging. I went to a social event in Mozilla Hubs recently, compliments of my colleague Alice. Carefully personalising my avatar with a glow of bioluminescent dinoflagellates, I found myself in a virtual masquerade party, engaging in an anonymous banter with other avatars that I would in the real world be able to identify by sight. Instead, I listened to the timbre of voices, the vibrant conversations. Personal space wasn't a thing, I accidentally moved straight through another avatar while we were communing in the space. We were invited to fly above our meeting location where I took a selfie. I was attuning in different ways to my normal experiences of face-to-face engagement. We've all read articles about the gathering of people from their domestic spaces, from balconies, from bedrooms, from garages. As a lecturer and a researcher in the School of Art at RMIT, I've never before had so many people in my home. This is a constellation of moments gliding at the same time as COVID-19 has had monumental impacts on our arts community. I want to implore us to think differently about how we creatively emerge from isolation. To do this, I'm interested in what the world would be like if authentic focus was given to creatively driven interdisciplinary practices that give us the space to breathe as we emerge from COVID-19. Do what we do best as creatives through connection to site, matter, and multifarious entanglements and assemblages. From an Australian perspective, I would like to see governments go beyond a creative investment that allows artists to just have a wage again, but allows artists to articulate the direction of their work through engaged interdisciplinary modes of practice. Using the notion of the laboratory allows us to think through interdisciplinary modes of practice. It allows us to consider the ecologies of public space and the interactions that co-constitute the multiple meanings of public space. In 2013, the City of Melbourne City Safety Team commissioned our research group CAST, Contemporary Art and Social Transformation, to explore safety in Hosier and Rutledge Lanes, which is in the inner city of Melbourne. Oh, I'm moving on. 2 years later, and 5 artists in the mix, we articulated back to the city the ameliorative qualities of the unexpected, the strengthening of artists' ideas through experimentation, the different ways public space can be enchanted and in turn enchant. For 12 years, I think my PowerPoint. For 12 years, I've been involved with the Gertrude Street Projection Festival. In 2017, curating the 10th anniversary of the festival, I invited artists to create and share their visions of the future, illuminating Gertrude Street across 10 days of Melbourne's winter. More recently, I'm working with David Cross, who spent many years at Massey University. David's advocacy for temporary practice and artistic license has allowed so many of us the capacity to reimagine space, to reveal previously untold stories of sight, to enchant, to shock, and engage audiences across the world and within our bubble between New Zealand and Australia. His more recent endeavour in partnership with Cameron Bishop through Public Art Commission at Deakin University is Treatment, the curation of site-specific works at the Western Treatment Plant in Aotearoa. It's become a conduit for my research. From moments of memorialisation and nostalgia, a line of flight has allowed me to find my companion species in bioluminescent dinoflagellates. Through immersive technologies and interdisciplinary relationships, I engage with stories of sight and beyond. I've been working at the end of a network of critical, invisible infrastructure, where it becomes visible, where organs of olfactory go into overdrive. Why the treatment plant? As technology advances and the footprint of sewage infrastructure reduces, land is remunerated for housing. This project has allowed us to explore a landscape usually inaccessible to the general public and reveal alternative narratives of sight. On this journey, I've engaged with site managers, community engagement staff, scientists, caretakers of our effluent. I've collaborated with community, neon fabricators, musicians, sound artists, scientists, philosophers, and now bioluminescent dinoflagellates. The dinoflagellates performatively lure us into the ocean of Port Phillip, luring sailors to their death. They are literally illuminating a story of climate change. My work explores human and non-human entanglements of wonder. From my situated location, an island in the middle of the Pacific, Southern and Indian Oceans, this work engages with narratives of the Southern Hemisphere is currently experiencing unprecedented occurrences of algal drift across the ocean, appearing as red tides during the day, locally occurring bioluminescent dinoflagellates Noctilucus scintillans glow blue in the evening's crashing waves. Nomadic and non-motile. They rely on the wind and the tide to move. Their glow works on a circadian rhythm, a 24-hour internal clock. They have a flagellum that extends from their cell, scooping phytoplankton nutrients and other algae from the water as food, carbon and emit oxygen. I believe algae is responsible for around 70 to 80% of the world's oxygen. They're often used as a bioassay tool to detect pollutants in water, particularly in excess of nitrogen. The affirmative industry. Through awe and wonder, they lure us into our reality. What I'm suggesting is nothing new. Site-specific work, interdisciplinary residencies, temporary projects in the public realm, let thinking reveal the multiple experiences of the present and navigate us with an ecological lens into the future. In his recent conversation piece, urban geographer Kurt Iverson shares his hopes for a more widely shared determination. Let post the inconvenience and frustration, I'm quoting him now, of restricted access to public space will translate into a more widely shared determination, not only to end the restrictions when the health crisis is over, but to act on the unjust exclusions and restrictions that were already a feature of our urban life. As with so many other aspects of our society, it's not enough to simply go back to how things were before. We must ensure our public spaces are not unjustly restricted when the next crisis comes along. So I'm thinking of art and public practice not just as an aesthetic or an add-on. As we return to public space, invite and resource creative approaches to public space. Develop frameworks for critical interdisciplinary residencies that include but are not limited to curators, artists, scientists, and social scientists, philosophers in all discussions about public space. Enable interdisciplinary modes of thinking that see us challenge and use practices that during COVID serve a purpose, but ultimately enable further discrimination, if not rolled back, as we re-emerge from public space restrictions. We are all made of stardust. As Rosie Braidotti would say, we're all in this together, but we're not the same. I want to propose that we start advocating from where we are, the needs of our communities and the interdisciplinary human and non-human relationships that contribute to rethinking of public space. Thank you.
Beautiful, Fiona, beautiful. It feels powerful. Thank you. We are all stardust. Do you want people to make comments, continue to make comments in the chat?
It would be really great if we could. I would love for us to have some declarations to take away from today's session that we could all use in our own work and our own practices moving forward. So it would be great if people want to keep adding to that list of declarations. And Sophie, perhaps you and I could work on editing something together and share to the broader group.
Sure. So keep adding. Here we are. Let's own the public spaces, Josh. But who owns the public space? I'm just aware. The major reflection I had was, I guess, as a young woman travelling on my own, how difficult it felt to be in some countries more than others. you know, this idea that, that was what I've put in about freedom from harassment. Yeah, and that's people of all genders and colours, and yeah. Anyway, that was my offer, but I.